The Empire had ruled the stars for 300 years. They had conquered 17 star systems and crushed every species that stood against them. Their soldiers were born for war. They stood 8 feet tall with hard exoskeletons that could stop plasma fire. Their claws could tear through metal. Their eyes could see in total darkness. They feared nothing because nothing had ever given them a reason to fear. High Commander was the greatest warrior the Empire had ever produced. He had led the conquest of 6 worlds himself. His name was spoken with terror across the galaxy. When he walked into a room, even his own soldiers trembled. He had never lost a battle. He had never shown mercy. He believed weakness was a disease that needed to be burned away. On this day stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion. The massive warship floated in the darkness between stars, surrounded by 3,000 other vessels. It was the largest fleet ever assembled in history, and it was heading toward a small blue planet called Earth. The scout ships had found this world 6 months ago. They had intercepted radio signals and television broadcasts. They had studied the dominant species. Now, had gathered his elite warriors to show them what they would soon conquer. A holographic screen flickered to life in the center of the bridge. The image showed humans. They were small creatures barely 6 feet tall. They had soft pink skin with no armor. They had flat teeth and small hands with no claws. They had no venom, no natural weapons, nothing that could hurt a warrior. The footage showed humans fighting each other. They used simple projectile weapons that fired metal bullets. They hid behind walls and shot at each other from a distance. Many of them died from wounds that would not even slow down. The soldiers on the bridge began to laugh. "Look at them," one warrior said. "They are made of paper." "A child could kill 10 of them," another added. "They bleed from a simple cut," a third warrior shouted. "How are they even alive?" Watched the footage with cold eyes. He saw the humans running, fighting, dying. He saw their cities, their vehicles, their technology. Everything about them was primitive. Everything about them was weak. "These creatures require 8 hours of sleep every day," his tactical officer reported. "They cannot survive extreme temperatures. They need constant supplies of water and food. Their bodies break down from simple diseases." More laughter filled the bridge. The warriors could not believe what they were seeing. This was supposed to be their next conquest. This was supposed to be a challenge. Raised one clawed hand, and the laughter stopped immediately. His soldiers fell silent and waited for their commander to speak. "We will add their world to our collection within a single rotation," said. His voice was deep and cold. "Prepare the invasion fleet. I want every ship ready to move within the hour." "Yes, High Commander," his officers responded in unison. Turned back to the holographic screen, he watched the humans for another moment. Such fragile things, he thought. They would make good slaves if they survived the initial attack. If not, their planet had resources worth taking. He felt nothing but contempt. On Earth, the sun was setting over the Atlantic Ocean. Lieutenant Commander Daniel Carter stood in the control room of the United Nations Defense Initiative headquarters. The facility was hidden deep underground, built to survive anything from nuclear war to asteroid impacts. It was humanity's last line of defense against threats from beyond the stars. Daniel was 42 years old with short gray hair and tired eyes. He had spent 20 years in the military before joining the initiative. He had seen combat in 3 wars. He had lost friends and watched good soldiers die, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for what he was seeing on his screen. The deep space monitoring stations had picked up something strange 3 days ago. At first, they thought it was a glitch in the system. Then they thought it was a natural phenomenon, maybe a cluster of asteroids. But the readings kept getting stranger. The objects were moving in formation. They were changing speed and direction. They were not natural. Now Daniel was looking at the clearest image they had captured. 3,000 objects, each one larger than any ship humanity had ever built. They were coming from beyond the solar system, and they were heading straight for Earth. Captain Torres walked up beside him. She was younger than Daniel, only 35, but she was the best tactical officer he had ever worked with. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, and her face showed no emotion, but Daniel could see the tension in her shoulders. "How long until they reach us?" she asked. 72 hours, Daniel replied, maybe less. Stared at the screen. 3,000 ships. They had no idea what kind of weapons those ships carried. They had no idea what kind of creatures were inside them. All they knew was that something was coming, and it was not coming in peace. "What do we do?" she asked. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. He thought about his wife and his 2 daughters. He thought about the 7 billion people living on the surface above them, going about their normal lives, unaware that everything was about to change. He turned to and said only 2 words, "Wake everyone." Within the hour, the world changed. Leaders of every nation received emergency calls. Military forces went on high alert. Scientists began analyzing the data from the monitoring stations. Secret bunkers opened their doors for the first time in decades. But even as humanity prepared for the unknown, they had no idea what was coming for them. They had no idea that somewhere in the darkness of space, alien warriors were laughing at them. They had no idea that they had already been judged and found wanting. The Empire did not ask for surrender. They did not negotiate. They did not show mercy. They simply took what they wanted and destroyed everything else. Daniel stood in the control room and watched the fleet grow closer. He did not know if humanity could survive what was coming. He did not know if they could fight back. But he knew one thing for certain. They would try. Whatever came through that darkness, whatever monsters emerged from those ships, humanity would face them. They would fight. They would bleed. They would die if they had to. But they would not go quietly. In the cold silence of space, the fleet moved closer. High Commander sat on his throne and planned his conquest. His soldiers sharpened their claws and dreamed of glory. None of them understood what they were about to face. None of them knew that the small, soft creatures on that blue planet had something that could not be measured by size or strength. They had the human spirit. And that was something they had never encountered before. The fleet arrived on a Tuesday morning. They came out of the darkness like a swarm of metal insects, blocking out the stars behind them. 3,000 ships positioned themselves in orbit around Earth. Their weapons powered up. Their soldiers prepared for battle. High Commander sat on his command throne and waited for the humans to beg for mercy. But the planet below was silent. Had conquered 6 worlds before this one. Every species reacted the same way when they saw his fleet. They screamed. They cried. They sent desperate messages pleading for their lives. They offered everything they had in exchange for survival. Earth sent nothing. No transmissions, no pleas, no surrender, just silence. Found this strange but not concerning. Perhaps the humans were too primitive to understand what was happening. Perhaps they were frozen with fear. It did not matter. The result would be the same. He activated the communication system on his ship and broadcast his message across every frequency the humans used. His voice echoed through televisions, radios, computers, and phones across the entire planet. Species of Earth said, "I am High Commander of the Empire. Your planet now belongs to us. You have 1 planetary cycle to surrender completely. Send your leaders to my flagship to discuss the terms of your submission. If you refuse, we will destroy your cities one by one until nothing remains. This is your only warning." The message ended, leaned back in his throne and waited. He expected a response within the hour. 12 hours passed, nothing. Was starting to feel something he had not felt in a very long time. Annoyance. These creatures were either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. He suspected the latter. Then a small blip appeared on his tactical screen. A single ship was approaching the flagship. It was tiny, barely larger than a shuttle. It looked old and damaged, held together with patches and hope. The name painted on its side was Defiance. The officers on the bridge laughed when they saw it. One ship, against an armada of 3,000. This was the human response. "Let it dock," commanded. He wanted to meet these foolish creatures face to face. The ship docked in the main hangar bay. Soldiers surrounded it with weapons drawn. When the door opened, a single human stepped out. His name was Colonel Hayes. He was 53 years old with white hair and a weathered face. He wore a simple military uniform with no armor and no visible weapons. He walked with a slight limp from an old injury. He looked at the giant alien soldiers around him without any fear in his eyes. The soldiers grabbed him roughly and put him in chains. They dragged him through the corridors of the ship while others pointed and laughed. "Look at the tiny creature," they said. "Look at how weak it is." Said nothing, he just walked. They brought him to the bridge and threw him at his feet. The High Commander rose from his throne and looked down at the small human. Slowly stood up, his chains rattling against the metal floor. "You send one man to negotiate your species' surrender?" asked. His voice dripped with contempt. Looked up at the massive alien. He did not flinch. He did not tremble. He simply met his eyes and held them. "No, sir," said calmly. "I came to deliver a warning and to show you something." Made a sound that might have been laughter. "A warning. You are in chains on my ship, surrounded by my army, and you speak of warnings." "Yes," said, "because I do not think you understand what you are dealing with." He reached into his pocket slowly. The soldiers around him raised their weapons, ready to fire, but only pulled out a small data tablet. He activated it with his thumb. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward the main screen. Was curious now. He nodded, and one of his officers connected the tablet to the ship's display system. Images began to appear on the giant screen, footage from human history, narrated as the images played. "This is the First World War," he said. The screen showed humans fighting in muddy trenches, explosions everywhere, bodies falling, soldiers charging into certain death. 10 million of us died. We kept fighting. The image changed. Soldiers running across a beach under heavy fire. "This is a place called Normandy. Our soldiers ran into gunfire knowing most of them would die before reaching the shore. They ran anyway." Another image, a mushroom cloud rising over a city. "This is what we did to ourselves. We created weapons that could destroy entire cities in seconds. We used them. Then we survived and rebuilt." More images flashed across the screen. Humans marching for civil rights against armed opposition. Humans rebuilding cities from rubble. Humans surviving floods, earthquakes, plagues. Humans always getting back up. "You see weak creatures," said quietly. "You see soft skin and small bodies, but you are missing something important." He looked directly at. His voice was steady and clear. "We are a species that has never stopped fighting, not against nature, not against disease, not against each other. We fight when we are hungry. We fight when we are tired. We fight when we are dying. It is what we are. It is what we do." He paused to let his words sink in. "You can kill millions of us. You can burn our cities. You can destroy everything we have built. And do you know what will happen?" Said nothing. For a moment, just a small moment, he felt something cold move through his chest, something that almost felt like doubt. "We will keep fighting," said. "The last human alive will pick up a rock and throw it at your ships. We will not stop. We cannot stop. It is not in our nature." He smiled then, a small, sad smile. "That is my warning, High Commander. You are not invading a planet. You are picking a fight with a species that does not know how to surrender." Silence filled the bridge. The soldiers had stopped laughing. They stared at the small human in chains who spoke to their commander without fear. Walked forward slowly. He towered over like a mountain over a pebble. Then, with one swift motion, he crushed the data tablet in his clawed hand. The pieces scattered across the floor. "Pretty words," said coldly, "from a dead species." Nodded slowly, as if he had expected this response. "Then let history decide which of us was right." Gave the order. Hayes was executed that evening on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion. He did not beg. He did not cry. He faced his death with the same calm courage he had shown from the beginning. The invasion began at dawn. The soldiers descended on Earth expecting easy victory. They expected fear and surrender. They expected the weak creatures to run and hide. They found something else entirely. They found humanity. They expected Earth to fall in 3 days. Their war simulations had predicted a quick and total victory. The humans had no space fleet. They had no energy weapons. They had no technology that could match power. It should have been easy. 1 week passed, then 2, then a month, then 3 months. Earth did not fall. The first wave of soldiers landed in major cities across the planet. They marched through the streets in perfect formation, their weapons ready, their armor gleaming. They expected the humans to run away screaming. Some did, but many others stayed behind. In New York, they took control of the city center within hours. They raised their flag over the tallest buildings and declared victory. That night, explosions ripped through their supply depot. 50 soldiers died. No one saw who planted the bombs. In London, they established a command post in a government building. The next morning, snipers killed 3 officers from half a mile away. They searched for days but never found the shooters. In Tokyo, in Berlin, in Sydney, in Cairo, the pattern repeated. They would conquer an area and then humans would strike from the shadows. They came out of sewers. They hid in ruined buildings. They attacked at night and disappeared before dawn. They had never faced anything like this before. Every species they had conquered had surrendered once their armies were defeated. The humans had no real army anymore. Their militaries had been destroyed in the first week, but they kept fighting anyway. A schoolteacher named Mills led a resistance cell in what remained of Chicago. She was 41 years old with kind eyes and gentle hands. Before the invasion, she had taught history to middle school students. Now she taught young fighters how to make explosives from household chemicals. Her group started with 12 people. Within 6 months, it had grown to 300. They lived in the tunnels beneath the city, coming up only to strike at the enemy. Had never held a weapon before the invasion. Now she carried a rifle everywhere she went. One night her team attacked a patrol. They killed 8 soldiers and captured their weapons. As looked at the bodies of the aliens, she felt something she had never felt before. Not fear, not sadness, just cold determination. "We need to hit them harder," she told her people. "Every day they are here is a day too long." In what used to be Detroit, a former mechanic named Cooper turned an abandoned car factory into a weapons manufacturing plant. He could not build plasma rifles like they had, but he could build something else. He called them tin cans. They were simple bombs made from metal pipes, nails, and explosive powder. They were ugly and crude, but they worked. His factory produced hundreds of them every week. Resistance fighters carried them across the country. Worked 18 hours a day. His hands were always covered in grease and burns. He slept on the factory floor and ate whatever food the supply teams could find. When someone asked him why he worked so hard, he just shrugged. "My grandfather fought in Vietnam," he said. "My father fought in Afghanistan. Fighting is what we do." They began to notice something strange in their casualty reports. They were losing soldiers every day, not in big battles but in small attacks, a bomb here, a sniper there. A supply convoy ambushed on a lonely road. The numbers added up. High Commander studied the reports with growing frustration. His elite warriors were being killed by creatures half their size with weapons made from junk. It made no sense. He ordered his commanders to increase patrols, to search every building, to punish any human who resisted. but the attacks only increased. The humans learned quickly. They discovered that exoskeletons were vulnerable to certain frequencies of sound. They built devices that emitted those frequencies and watched enemy soldiers collapse in pain. They learned that moved slowly in cold temperatures. They lured patrols into freezing warehouses and ambushed them there. They learned that were overconfident. They expected enemies to fight with honor face to face. Humans did not fight with honor. They fought to win. Sargent was 28 years old when the invasion began. She had been a soldier for 6 years, serving in military police units. When her base was destroyed, she took the survivors and went underground. Her squad had 12 people. They called themselves the Ghosts because they never stayed in one place for long. They moved through the ruins like shadows, striking at enemy targets and vanishing before reinforcements arrived. One night learned about a communications center. It controlled all enemy transmissions in the entire region. If it went down, they would be blind and deaf for days. The center was heavily guarded. Getting in would be almost impossible. Getting out would be harder. Gathered her squad and explained the mission. She told them the truth. Most of them would probably die. She gave everyone the chance to stay behind. No one did. They attacked at 3 in the morning. The fighting was brutal and close. Soldiers were twice the size of humans, but in tight corridors, size became a disadvantage. The humans were faster, more flexible, more desperate. One by one, squad members fell. She watched friends die beside her, but they kept pushing forward. When it was over, was the only one standing. She was bleeding from 7 different wounds. Her left arm was broken. She could barely see through the blood in her eyes. But the communications center was destroyed. She crawled out of the building and began moving toward friendly territory. 3 miles through enemy-held streets. She moved through alleys and drainage pipes. Every step was agony. Twice she passed out and had to force herself awake. She made it. When the medics found her, they could not believe she was still alive. They asked her how she had survived, how she had kept going with so many injuries. Looked at them with tired eyes. "I was angry," she said simply. Stories like hers spread across the planet. Stories of ordinary people doing impossible things, teachers becoming warriors, mechanics becoming weapons makers, teenagers picking up rifles, grandparents becoming spies. They had conquered 17 star systems. They had crushed species far more advanced than humans, but they had never faced anything like this. They had never faced an enemy that simply refused to stop fighting. High Commander stood on his bridge and watched the casualty numbers climb. His soldiers were growing tired. Some were growing afraid. For the first time in his long career, he began to wonder if he had made a terrible mistake. The humans kept fighting. They would always keep fighting. 2 years into the occupation, something changed. The soldiers, who had once marched through human cities with pride and confidence, now moved through the streets with their weapons raised and their eyes scanning every shadow. They jumped at small noises. They refused to patrol alone. They whispered among themselves when their officers were not listening. They were afraid. The soldiers had a name for Earth now. They called it the meat grinder. Assignment to the human planet was no longer considered an honor. It was considered a punishment. It was considered a death sentence. Young warriors who had dreamed of glory now dreamed of transfer orders. They wanted to go anywhere else. They wanted to fight any other enemy, anything but the humans. High Commander received reports of desertion. For the first time in history, soldiers were abandoning their posts. Some fled to remote parts of the planet and hid. Others tried to steal ships and escape back to space. Executed the deserters when they were caught. But he could not execute the fear that was spreading through his army like a disease. The humans sensed this fear, and they used it. Deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, in a facility that had once been used for nuclear research, a team of scientists worked day and night on a secret project. They were led by a physicist named Park. He was 60 years old with thick glasses and messy white hair. Before the invasion, he had studied theoretical energy fields. Now he studied captured technology. His team had recovered pieces of destroyed enemy equipment from battlefields across the country. Plasma rifles, shield generators, communication devices, power cells, and his scientists took them apart and tried to understand how they worked. It was difficult. Technology was centuries more advanced than anything humans had built. The science behind it used principles that humans barely understood. But was stubborn, and he had something they did not expect. He had access to the entire knowledge of human history, thousands of years of innovation and discovery, countless brilliant minds who had solved impossible problems before. He studied the plasma weapons and found similarities to theories had proposed a century ago. He examined the shield generators and saw connections to quantum physics. Piece by piece, he began to understand. 18 months after the invasion began, his team produced their first working plasma rifle built entirely from human materials. It was crude and unreliable. It overheated after 3 shots, but it worked. 2 months later, they built their first shield generator. It could only block 1 hit before failing, but it worked. And then created something they had never imagined. He called it a ghost drive. It was a propulsion system that produced no heat signature and no energy signal. A ship equipped with a ghost drive could fly right past sensors without being detected. The resistance had been fighting blind for 2 years. Now they could see. Now they could strike where the enemy least expected. Now they could win. General took command of the counteroffensive. She was 55 years old with gray hair cut short and eyes that had seen too much death. She had been a colonel when the invasion started. Now she was the highest-ranking military officer left on Earth. She spent 3 months planning the attack. Every detail had to be perfect. Every unit had to know exactly what to do and when to do it. There would be no second chances. The date was December 7th, chosen on purpose. It was the anniversary of Pearl Harbor, the day that had pulled America into World War II. On that day, an enemy had thought they could defeat the American spirit with one devastating attack. They had been wrong. Sent the signal at dawn. Across 6 continents simultaneously, human forces attacked. In Europe, resistance fighters emerged from hiding and struck at command centers. They used captured weapons and homemade explosives. They hit fuel depots and communication stations. They cut supply lines and blocked reinforcement routes. In Asia, ghost ships appeared from nowhere and attacked enemy vessels in orbit. They scrambled to respond, but they could not target ships they could not see. 3 of their cruisers went down in the first hour. In Africa and South America, ground forces coordinated attacks on enemy bases. They had been practicing for months in secret, learning to work together across vast distances using coded radio signals. In North America, the largest assault force in human history moved against the headquarters in what had once been Washington, D.C. Tanks rolled through the ruins. Soldiers advanced street by street, building by building. The fighting was brutal. They were stronger and better equipped, but the humans had numbers. They had determination, and they had something to fight for. Mills led her resistance cell into battle that day. She had started with 12 people 3 years ago. Now she commanded over 1,000. She watched them charge toward enemy positions with a pride she could not put into words. Cooper drove a truck loaded with weapons to the front lines. His factory had been producing arms for 2 years. Now those arms were being used to liberate the planet. He smiled as he heard the sound of his creations firing in the distance. Was there too. She had recovered from her wounds and returned to active duty. Her new squad was even better than her old one. They called themselves the Ghosts, just like before. The battle lasted 72 hours, 3 days of constant fighting without sleep or rest. Humans fell by the thousands, but they kept coming. wave after wave after wave. On the morning of the fourth day, something incredible happened. The lines broke. Enemy soldiers began retreating. They fled toward their landing zones, desperate to reach their ships. The once proud warriors of the Empire ran from creatures half their size. Watched from her command post as the enemy fled, she felt no joy, only exhaustion, and the cold satisfaction of justice delayed but finally delivered. The ships lifted off from the surface and retreated to orbit. They regrouped around the flagship and prepared for the next phase of the battle, but there was no next phase. High Commander looked at the reports and saw the truth. His ground forces were shattered. His fleet was damaged. His soldiers were demoralized. He had lost more warriors on this single planet than in all his previous conquests combined. For the first time in his life, he gave an order he had never given before. "Retreat," he said quietly. "Withdraw from the system." The fleet turned away from Earth and engaged their faster-than-light drives. Within minutes, they were gone. On the surface below, humans looked up at the sky. They watched the enemy ships disappear into the darkness of space. They could not quite believe what had happened. Earth had not merely survived, Earth had won. Stood in the ruins of Washington and allowed herself a single tear. It fell down her cheek and disappeared into the dust. "We did it," she whispered. "Wherever you are, we did it." The war was over. Humanity had prevailed. But the story was not finished yet. 1 year after the liberation, Earth was slowly healing. The cities were still in ruins, but people were rebuilding. The dead were mourned, but the living moved forward. It was what humans had always done. It was what they would always do. The United Nations had been reformed into something new. They called it the Earth Coalition. It represented all the nations and all the people who had survived the invasion. Their headquarters was in New York, in a building that had been reconstructed from the rubble of the old United Nations complex. Chancellor Marshall was the leader of the coalition. He was 62 years old with a calm voice and steady hands. He had been a diplomat before the war, spending his career trying to prevent conflicts through negotiation. When the invasion came, he had joined the resistance and fought alongside soldiers half his age. Now he was trying to guide humanity into a new era. On a quiet morning in March, his aide brought him an unusual message. A diplomatic vessel had entered the solar system. It was requesting permission to approach Earth, not to attack, to talk. Read the message twice. He called an emergency meeting of the Coalition Council. The debate lasted for hours. Some wanted to destroy the ship immediately. Others wanted to hear what they had to say. In the end, made the decision himself. "Let them come," he said. "We won the war, now let us see if we can win the peace." The ship landed outside New York 3 days later. It was small and unarmed. A diplomatic vessel just as they had claimed. The door opened and a single figure stepped out. It was. The former High Commander looked different now. His armor was gone. He wore simple robes in the traditional style. His great shoulders were slumped. His eyes, once burning with pride, were dull and tired. He had been stripped of his rank after his failure on Earth. His military career was over. His honor was destroyed. He had become a symbol of the greatest defeat in history. But he had asked to come here. He had requested this mission personally. The government had agreed, partly because they hoped for peace and partly because they no longer cared what happened to him. Armed guards escorted through the streets of New York. People stopped to watch. Some shouted angry words. Some threw things. Most just stared in silence at the creature who had tried to enslave them. Walked without responding. He kept his eyes forward and his head bowed. He did not try to defend himself. He did not try to explain. The Coalition Assembly Hall was packed with people. Survivors of the war filled every seat. Mills was there in the front row. Her hands still carried scars from the factory work she had done during the resistance. She looked at with cold hatred in her eyes. stood near the door in her military uniform. She was now a major, promoted for her service during the war. Her medals gleamed on her chest, but her eyes were hard. She had lost too many friends to feel anything but anger toward the alien who stood before her. Thousands more watched through cameras that broadcast the event across the planet. Every human on Earth was paying attention. They wanted to see the monster who had invaded their world. Walked to the center of the hall and stopped. He stood alone, surrounded by the species he had tried to destroy. The room was completely silent. Chancellor Marshall rose from his seat and approached the alien. He stopped a few feet away and looked up at the creature that still towered over him. "You asked to speak to us," said. "We are listening." Had prepared a speech. He had spent weeks writing it. He had intended to offer terms for a peace treaty. He had planned to discuss trade agreements and territorial boundaries and all the other things that diplomats discussed. But standing there, looking at these small creatures who had done the impossible, he could not remember a single word. He looked at Mills and saw a schoolteacher who had become a warrior. He looked at and saw a soldier who had crawled 3 miles with 7 wounds because she was angry. He thought of Hayes, who had smiled before his execution, who had warned him that humans did not know how to surrender, who had been right about everything. He thought of the children who had thrown rocks at his tanks because they had nothing else to throw. He thought of the old men and women who had carried weapons they could barely lift. He thought of a species that had every reason to give up and simply refused. Something broke inside, something that had been building since the day his fleet retreated from Earth, something he had been trying to ignore for an entire year. His great legs gave out beneath him. He fell to his knees in front of humanity, and for the first time in his long life, he felt water running down his face. Tears did not cry. It was considered weakness. It was considered shame, but could not stop them. "We came to enslave you," he said. His voice cracked and trembled. "We thought you were weak. We thought you were nothing." He looked up at the humans surrounding him. His vision was blurred by tears, but he could see them clearly enough. "You taught us what strength truly means," he continued. "It is not armor. It is not size. It is not weapons or technology or any of the things we valued." He paused, struggling to find the right words. "It is the refusal to kneel. It is the choice to stand when standing is impossible. It is the courage to fight when there is no hope of winning." He bowed his head. "My people wish to know, how do we make peace with a species like yours? How do we face you as equals when you have proven yourselves greater than we could ever imagine?" The room remained silent. Thousands of humans stared at the weeping alien. Many of them felt no sympathy. They had lost too much. They had suffered too greatly. But Chancellor Marshall stepped forward. He looked at this broken creature, this former conqueror who had been humbled by humanity's spirit. He thought about all the years of war, all the death, all the pain. And he made a choice. He extended his hand, that simple human gesture, an offer of connection, an offer of trust. "You ask us," Marshall said quietly, "and we figure it out together. That is what humans do." Stared at the extended hand. He did not understand why this human was offering it. He had done nothing to deserve forgiveness. He had done nothing to earn mercy. But slowly, carefully, he reached out and took Marshall's hand. In the audience, Mills felt something shift inside her. She thought of all the students she had lost, all the friends who had died, but she also thought of the world her students would inherit, a world at peace, a world where they could grow old without fear. She smiled through her own tears, finally allowed her shoulders to relax. The tension she had carried for 3 years slowly began to drain away. The war was truly over. They had won. Across the planet, humanity watched and understood what had happened. They had not just won a war. They had not just survived an invasion. They had changed the galaxy forever. They had shown the universe what humans were made of, not flesh and blood, not soft skin and small bodies. something greater, something unbreakable. The human spirit. And that spirit would burn bright among the stars for as long as humanity existed. The end.